How often should companies change their auditors to ensure that they remain impartial when conducting business? 10, 20 or 50 years? The Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors feels it should be much shorter than that. And joining us for more insight is the body's CEO, Bernard Agulhas. Thanks so much, Bernard, for your time this evening. So why does auditor rotation make sense?
We're concerned that if auditors, if the tenure with the same client becomes too cozy, when there's long tenure, then the relationship might become too cozy and it might impact on the auditor's independence. And when an auditor is not sufficiently independent, they might not deliver a high quality auditor because they don't remain as skeptical as they should be.
Yeah, not everyone holds the same view though,
Yes.
So there are some that are advocating against a change of auditors in 10 years. You talk about it garnering support. Where's that level of support sitting right now?
Some regulators from overseas in our position, they have supported us. They've even sent us messages of support, and also we're happy that government supports us because they are sensing the same concerns that we have, in that when auditors remain the auditors for too long, then it will impair independence, and ultimately they know that they're there to protect the public and we're there to protect the shareholder.
Yeah, we've had Christine Ramon, Anglo Gold Ashanti CFO, amongst those saying that mandatory rotation would dilute, first of all, the oversight role of audit committees and shareholders' rights. Do you see any merit in the argument that's being put on the table there?
Well, if the audit committees themselves, if they performed their function and made sure that auditors were independent, then we wouldn't see audit tenures of over 100 years. And that's why the shareholders have to also play a role and question the audit committees. In fact, if the audit committees recommend that the auditor should be appointed after a period of say 100 years, then it's up to the shareholders, but it means that shareholders should also start asking more questions.
Do you think that the latest headlines around KPMG's links to the Gupta family businesses are working in your favor right now and acting more so as an advocate for what you're proposing?
Some of the issues that have been identified around KPMG has been the independence issues, and again, because the tenure has been more than 10 years, we're not saying that's a magic number, but clearly there has been a long relationship, and that could have impaired their independence.
Where that's potentially a trigger for KPMG's woes, where do investigations stand as far as those relationships are concerned?
We've started by asking the files, the audit files, because we can only look at the work of the auditors during performing the audit of Linkway Trading, and we are busy going through the files at the moment. After this, it will go to an investigations committee. We will draft a charge sheet of alleged charges, and we'll give KPMG the opportunity to respond to those charges.
How long before there's an outcome like that?
The due process takes a while. The committee doesn't sit that often, and we need to give the auditors a fair opportunity to respond as well. So sometimes it can drag on for about a year, but we also appreciate that it is in the public's best interest if we get this done as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Surely something like what's transpired with KPMG should have been picked up sooner. Are you surprised that it wasn't?
You mean by the auditors?
Yeah.
In this particular, we're only investigating the audit in which these irregularities or transgressions occurred, alleged transgressions occurred. So in this particular year, it was obviously the transactions went through in this particular year, so it should have been picked up in this year. But if there were other transgressions that should have made the auditor more skeptical around the information presented to them, then I suppose they could have picked it up earlier if there was any signs.
Yeah. How are you rating, Bernard, governance standards in the industry right now? Is there enough oversight of relationship monitoring, and when they start to work out of bounds?
The structure that should be monitoring this is in fact the audit committee, and that's why audit committees are they're not very happy that we've introduced this measure. But I think if audit committees were in fact looking at the independence the way they should, we wouldn't have seen these long audit tenures of over 100 years, because surely the audit committee should question such long tenures. And that is why our measure, the RBA as the audit regulator, felt that it's our responsibility to ensure that the shareholder is protected by putting a limit on that tenure. And I think in fact I believe that the current measure should assist exist, but it doesn't mean that it's the only measure that we'll introduce to look at auditors' independence.
Yeah. Taking a look at what rotation now brings with it, it's costly, it's time-consuming, we bring some risk burden into the equation as well. How do those metrics fare as far as you're concerned?
We've considered all of those. We've done a lot of research from overseas countries that have implemented overseas. We do not believe that the cost arguments, that the time arguments are sufficient to outweigh the benefits that we would get from protecting the shareholder by enforcing auditor rotation.
Yeah. Well, what about the risk burden? Because there's a whole lot of transfer of information that needs to happen when this rotation happens. Do we have the right skills in place? Do we have the right mechanisms to ensure that there's a smooth handover process?
When the auditor takes on a new client, any new client, whether it's because of rotation or not, that auditor has a responsibility in terms of our standards to know their client and to understand their client and to assess the risks of taking on that client. So the auditor has to go through that process anyway, and the auditor can't start to get to know their client 5 years into the relationship. The auditor has to know their client when they take on the client. So the argument that it takes a few years to get to know the client doesn't hold for the RBA.
Yeah. Going back very quickly to KPMG, I know this is still a pending investigation. It's still being monitored. What kind of recourse are we potentially looking at here?
The RBA can issue a fine. At the moment, our fines are limited by the Administration of Fines Act, which doesn't result in very high fines, but we're looking into that at the moment. So it could result in a fine. It could end up in a disciplinary hearing, and at that hearing, the disciplinary committee will take a decision on the appropriate sanction for KPMG.
And those aside, there's also a whole lot of reputational damage that's part of the price, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, that is probably worse than the sanctions that the RBA could impose.
Well, let's leave it there, Bernard. Thanks so much for having joined us in studio this evening. Of course, Bernard Agulhas is CEO of the Independent Regulatory Board for Auditors.